Susan approached her family, and looking around, she saw her two older kids, but she didn't see Carl. So she turned to Bob and asked him, "Where's Carl?" As soon as she saw his face, she knew that he didn't know. Panic and fear started to set in. Carl was gone. Welcome to Steadfast Life, where I share real stories of miracles, courage, and quiet, unwavering faith. So, if that's of interest to you, please subscribe and send the like button a thank you text just because. If you have a story that you'd like to have featured on this channel of a miracle or a tender mercy that you've heard about or been a part of, please fill out the form in the description below. Alright, let's get into today's story. On a Friday evening in September of 1999, Susan walked up to the Sears door holding her youngest child's hand in hers and her second youngest child's hand in hers, while her oldest child walked beside her and her husband, Bob. Susan and Bob had 3 kids, so going out on a shopping trip like this was no easy feat. And they were going to the Sears department store because that's where Bob worked. He sold vacuums, and they needed to get a few items there. As they went inside, they started their shopping journey. The 2 older boys loved seeing all of the items on the display stands, so they stopped at every single display stand along the way. Unfortunately, Susan realized that shopping like this was going to take them hours. So she turned to Bob and told him that she was going to go ahead and get the items that the family needed, and she would meet up with them at the vacuums. That's where they were headed. Because Bob sold vacuums at Sears, and he was good at it too, and he enjoyed it. He liked meeting all the customers. He especially liked seeing the cool new things that vacuums could do. The boys and him were going to head that way, looking at each display stand along the way. So Susan handed her kids over to Bob, and then she went on her way, breathing a sigh of relief as she was able to take a small break from being an attentive mother for the whole day. The boys and Bob kept going to the vacuum. When they got there, Bob started showing his boys the coolest new features in the newest vacuums, like the Kenmore Progressive 100, and the boys were engrossed in it, and Bob enjoyed it too. He thought it was fun to show his boys what he did for work. Meanwhile, Susan was getting everything pretty quickly. She was finishing up. She began the walk back through the department store to the vacuum section where she knew she would find her husband Bob and her kids. As she approached them, she could see Bob was telling the boys about this new vacuum and showing them how it worked, and also talking to some customers that stopped by along the way even though he wasn't on the clock. She smiled because she loved seeing her boys learn from their dad. As she got closer, she looked around and she didn't see Carl anywhere. So she looked behind Bob, she looked around Bob, she looked nearby, but she couldn't find him. She turned to Bob and said, "Bob, where's Carl?" Bob looked up at her. Panic came across his face, and Susan knew just by the look on his face that he didn't know where Carl was. You see, the vacuums had caught the interest of Carl for a few minutes, but he was only 3. And after a short while, he was bored and decided he wanted to go wander off and see what else he could find in the store. This wasn't the first time that Carl had wandered off on his own. He liked to go explore. This time, however, was in a very large store. Panic hit both of them as they thought of Carl being lost. They talked it over briefly and came up with a plan that they would meet together in 5 minutes at a meeting point, and in the meantime, they would go look for Carl. Bob would go on his own, and Susan would stay with the 2 older boys. Palms sweating with nervous anticipation, Bob started running through the store, yelling Carl's name, slowing down just enough when he approached some family or a little boy that had dark hair and he couldn't see his face to say the name Carl, but then every time the little boy would turn, it would turn out to not be Carl. He kept going around the store running, looking for Carl. Meanwhile, Susan took her older boys and told them that she needed them to look in all of the clothing rounds and the clothing racks nearby because they knew that Carl liked to play peekaboo in the clothing racks sometimes. The boys and her set off doing that, and she also reminded them to pray because God could help them find Carl. She herself was praying fervently, and she knew that Bob was doing the same. After just 5 minutes or so of searching, The family got together at the meetup point. Susan and the boys saw Bob running from the left. He was panting when he got to them, and he asked, "Have you seen Carl?" They said no, and Bob hadn't seen Carl either. So they talked it over again and came up with another plan. Bob set off running again, and Susan and the boys went to go look everywhere a little toddler might be. Behind large items, behind display cases, in other clothing rounds and racks, in corners. They searched for 20 minutes, 30 minutes passed by. The panic and fear that Susan felt grew greater and greater with each passing minute. So her prayers grew more ferventer and ferventer as time went on. Nearby, in the store, a security guard opened his office door, walked inside, and sat down in his chair, and he looked up at the monitors, and he could see a family running around the store, obviously looking for someone or something. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could tell that they seemed to be saying a similar or same word over and over again. After he looked at the monitors for a minute, he got up, turned around behind his chair, and got down on one knee and reached his hand out and put it on the shoulder of a little boy and said, "Do you know those people?" The little boy didn't say anything, but he nodded. Then the security guard said, "Let's go find them." So he took the little boy by the hand, opened the door, and they walked out to go find this family. After looking again, in a clothing round that she knew she had already looked in, she thought Carl was going between clothing rounds, hiding, outmaneuvering them. In desperation, she was just looking wherever she could. She came out of the clothing round and looked around and saw a security guard walking toward her. Looking at his outstretched arm, she saw that he was holding the hand of a little boy. Her vision went to the little boy, her eyes blurred and filled with tears, and she started running, and she picked up Carl and hugged him and held him like she was never going to let him go. At the same time, she also yelled to her boys to come over and, Bob, we found him." Soon, Bob came running around the corner and caught up to them. In gratitude, they all hugged. Susan, still not letting go of Carl, turned to listen to Bob ask the security guard about the events and how he ended up with Carl. The security guard said that he was making his rounds around the store, making sure everything was okay and everybody was doing well when he found this little boy. Not wanting the boy to get lost or taken by someone else, the security guard took the boy and brought him into his office so they could watch the screen. Soon they saw this family running around on the monitors, and the guard asked Carl if Carl knew the family, and he said yeah, and then the guard brought Carl out to the family. Susan and Bob thanked the security guard for what he did for them, and the family went home. Susan and the family prayed that they would find Carl, and God heard their prayer. Carl was found, and he was safe. That's going to do it for today's story. If you got something out of it, please comment below and subscribe. If you have a miracle or a tender mercy that you've been a part of that you'd like to have featured on our channel, please fill out the form in the description below. And remember to send the like button a thank you text just because. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.